Hello, everyone. We are back from our Red X month, and we're going to be talking about worthwhile splurges. Welcome to the Ultimate Crowdsourced Personal Finance Show. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, very excited to be getting back into the saddle. And Brad and I just wrapped up our wonderful Red X month, took the month of August off. And I know we've been missing this platform, missing you guys, excited to be back. So to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, it's September 2021. It's hard to believe. Our beloved Red X month is over. But yeah, it's always good to be back here with you, chatting and sending this out to the world. So I don't know. Would you deem this your first Red X month ever? And I guess also with that, explain to the people who may not have known about it what the Red X month is.
Yeah, I think people were surprised at the veracity with which I tackled tenacity.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Okay. With the zest, the amount of zest that I brought into this Red X month, like I just shut down. I was unavailable. You could not contact me. We could not do meetings. And the idea behind the Red X month, inspired by Vincent Puglisi from Freelance to Freedom and Total Life Freedom, was this idea that what if you could just, look at your calendar and ahead of time, just take a month and just take a red marker and just put an X through it. And for that month, you're unavailable. You're unavailable to, maybe the normal routine of life. You just kind of prioritize whatever it is you want. You prioritize your family, prioritize, things that you've been putting off. It doesn't mean necessarily that you leave or go on vacation, but just you're not available for your normal routine. You're not available for your job or for your corporation that you work for, et cetera. And you and I had talked about this, and you had done a better job implementing this in past years, but this was the first year that I kind of committed to it as well. And yeah, we did nothing for Choose FI over the month of August. In fact, I remember Ed was trying to get us on a call and was actually surprised every time that he would try to get a meeting teed up that it just got shut down. Like, dude, the family knows that we're on a Red X month. We are unavailable. And so it was good, man. It was a very interesting experience.
Nice. Yeah, that's so awesome. And yeah, to your point, if your family believes in you more, right? When you say, hey, we are on this Red X month, this is a month for family, and you're not just hopping on calls, right? Because it's so easy to do something like that, right? Like, oh, it's just a 30-minute call. That's simple. But when your kids see that, when your wife sees that, oh, he's just going back, right? He's falling back into old habits, which I know you and I both struggle with. I'm not sure, depending on the season of the year, each of us struggle more mightily than the other at certain times. But I think we're both susceptible to that, right? So yeah, this is the fourth year in a row now that we've done this. I guess, last year, 2020 was a little anomalous, obviously. But yeah, for us, it pretty much entails like a month of travel, which is a lot of fun. And now in prior years, we took a month off in Scotland. We took a month in Hawaii, which was amazing, obviously. This year was a little bit different. We took a couple shorter trips. We went to the Poconos, actually up in Pennsylvania, rented a lake house. We went to Long Island to visit our family. Laura and I went up to Maine together without the kids for almost a week, which was really, really cool. So it was a bunch of these little mini trips, but all in all, it was great. And I think what I would want to say to the audience is this is not about just us, right? This is not about two podcasters. This is not about limited to entrepreneurs. This is not limited to people who have already made it or whatever you want to call it, right? What I would look at is say, how can I implement this kind of concept in my own life based on whatever situation, limitations I may have? And that might mean this is a Red X week, right? Or a Red X 5 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be this massive thing that can only be a month. So what would it look like to take 2 weeks off where you just shut it down? All of those things that might take up a ton of your time. Like for me, and I still am susceptible to this, but going back to the computer and just checking email or just checking this or what, I come up with all these rationalizations for, oh, it's only 5 minutes. But at this point, my kids know that my kids don't necessarily believe me anymore when I say that, right? They know, oh, I'm just running upstairs for a minute, turns into 20 more times than not. So it's an awareness, just like with most things in life, just being aware of where you're struggling goes a real long way towards making you or helping you make positive change. So for me, that awareness helps. But, like I was saying, okay, how can you implement this in your life? And sure, maybe it'll eventually be a month or a year when you're at 5, but what would it look like to just do something a little bit differently? And I think that's really inspiring and empowering for all of us, and why, Jonathan, you and I were so enamored when we heard Vincent talk about this the first time.
Yeah, and it didn't happen right away either. I mean, when we heard about it, we neither of us, or at least me, I wasn't in a place to be able to do that. But once you see it, it seems like it's a worthwhile goal, and it's, as you said, it's something that you can bite off in pieces and you can start working towards. So I think it'll probably be a thing for us going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love it. It's something we cherish as a family, and use the word worthwhile in there, right? And I've been thinking about, and I actually wrote about this in the Fi-Weekly newsletter that I sent out last week, about worthwhile splurges. Okay, so ways that you can spend a little bit more money and get outsized returns from it. So I think, Jonathan, part of the maybe caricature, the negative caricature of the financial independence community is we pinch pennies and we're watching every dime that goes out, and the deprivation and scarcity. And I think you and I have worked really, really hard to make that a thing of the past and focus on what do we value in life? What do we want to spend money on? What brings us joy, happiness? And like I said, that word value, that's what we have hit on so significantly. And I've tried to reframe my own spending. I think I wouldn't have looked back normally and said, I deprived myself, or there was this scarcity mindset. But I think if I'm intellectually honest, there's always been part of that. And I don't think it was a massive thing for me, but I've tried to reset that now to an abundance mindset of, okay, where can I find even more value? Even if it's against my nature or constitution, right? So the cases in point actually were on 2 of these vacation trips that we took. So yeah, the first one was regarding our trip. Like I said, we took this lake trip to the Poconos. So we rented an Airbnb for a week, and we just knew it would be just this cool little adventure. So we tried stand-up paddleboarding for the first time. I literally went horseback riding, Jonathan, for the first time in my entire life. I've never been on a horse, which is kind of sad. But, we got to do all these fun little things.
I'm sorry, I don't interrupt you, but I can almost imagine the level of distrust that you focused on that horse as you were riding it for the first time. You're looking, you're like, this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well. Tell me I'm wrong, but
No, I have to say, your instincts are right, clearly, because you have seen me around animals before, and I'm not,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the fear of animals was knocked into my brain at an early age. But I have to say, horseback riding was one of the best things I've ever done. I loved it. So clearly your instincts are right, spot on right. But dude, I loved it to the point
amazing.
Where it's dude, I'm coming back to Richmond and looking up horseback riding lessons. Okay. It just felt, I don't know, it felt very natural,
amazing.
Just to be in the woods. It was super cool.
I love that I'm wrong. I love that I'm wrong. I mischaracterized you.
But yeah, you're not wrong in theory. I think you could make that guess 9 times out of 10 and you'd be right. But anyway, obviously each individual of those items were worthwhile splurges. But I guess what I'm talking about specifically is the actual location of our Airbnb. Okay, so this was a fairly large community. There were a couple thousand houses, or let's say many, many hundreds of houses. I don't know if a couple thousand might be exaggeration, but there were dozens of houses on Airbnb in this community. And we're like, oh, does it really matter if we're not precisely on the lake or not in this precise area that we can walk to the main amenities? Is it really that big of a deal to drive a couple minutes? And we realized that while we were hemming and hawing about this, it was only like a 10% difference between being a 5-minute drive and being a 100-yard walk, right? So like a 30-second walk. And again, even though it probably would be in our normal nature to take the cheaper option, we said, okay, what would it look like if this was different, right? Like, what would it look like if we could splurge a little? And we got the single house that I would argue was in the best location in the entire community. So out of these many, many hundreds, if not potentially thousands. And like I said, it was only a 10% premium. And Jonathan, honestly, it was probably a 2 or 3x decision for us. Our vacation was probably twice as good because of that, because we could walk there to the rental shack for the stand-up paddleboards in 30 seconds. We could walk to the pool or the beach in 45 seconds, as opposed to making this very specific decision. Okay, we're all jumping in the car now and we're going out for the day. It allowed so much more spontaneity of, hey, let's go back to the house and just rest up. It was during the Olympics, so let's watch the Olympics for a half hour, and then let's see if the rental hut got the stand-up paddleboards back or something like that. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but it was fantastic. And it was this tiny little percentage splurge, but made a massive difference.
So time on the lake, time on horses, time with family. Sounds like it was a month well spent. And I guess that's the challenge, right? Like if people were to identify, over the past summer, over the past year, what have the worthwhile splurges been? And there was something in there that I think that, was really the essence of that is like it outperformed. It was a multiplier. I mean, yes, it cost 10% more, than you could have scraped by. But I mean, it doubled or tripled the joy that the trip actually provided. And that can be a trap because we can always justify the upgrade on everything. But if we really apply some intentionality to it, I think there are things that we can pull out and we can say, I am so glad that we did this. I am so glad that we did that. And just by recognizing that little detail, it allows us to treasure it more, when it becomes a memory as opposed to an experience.
Yeah, I think that is the key, right? It's because to your point, you can always rationalize more, right? It's very easy to get into that slippery slope or that hedonic treadmill of, hey, it's only a couple $100 more for the business class seat on the flight or the first class seat, but it's worth it, right? Like, and to some people, clearly it is worth it. But, again, there is that slippery slope. And then, okay, I did it once. Now I'm a person who flies first class, or, you can always make these rationalizations. But for me, it's how do I look for outsized value? And outsized value, I mean, obviously this is a nebulous thing, right? Like I can't tell you specifically and concretely that my vacation was twice as good. But in our mind's eye, we all said, hey, this is clearly worth it. That was unquestionably. And now one of the factors when we go on vacation is without a doubt, location. Precise location is, it's like the location when it comes to real estate. I think that holds true to a large degree on vacations. And we actually saw it. I'm not going to waste a ton of time talking about that on our main vacation, but it was the identical thing. Even being a mile down the road would have made it a dramatically different vacation as opposed to, hey, we can park our car in the heart of everything in this town of Ogunquit and walk, right? We can walk 15 seconds to the town or a minute to the beach. It made everything easier. And, Jonathan, I would also say, look for ways where a worthwhile splurge can be a time savings as well. And I'll give you a minute. Hopefully you can come up with your own example. So I'm not just yapping the whole time here. But one that came to my mind recently was a service that I didn't even realize. So as you know, I'm kind of like fanatical about a lot of things. And one of them is shredding like every piece of mail that comes into my house. Okay. I'm sure there are people out there saying, okay, you obviously should do that. Or many people think it's overkill. Let's not adjudicate that right now. Let's just say this is something that I do. Okay. So anything with any sensitive information on it, I toss into, we have a bag in our closet that's like my shredding bag, and it invariably fills up over months. And when it gets to the point of breaking, I then dutifully go downstairs to my little shredder. And Jonathan, I kid you not, it takes me hours to shred these damn things. Even with like a decently high volume shredder, it just takes forever. It's just so annoying. And I rue the day when I have to go down and do the shredding. So long story short, we have a box basically for Choose a Pie at this company called PostNet. It's like one of these services where they have a bunch of mailboxes there that aren't PO boxes. And I walked in and I saw they had a bin and it said 75 cents per pound for shredding services. Okay. So you don't have to do anything. You don't have to take staples out. You don't have to take things out of envelopes. You just literally bring in my case, I brought a Walmart bag filled of shredding and, months and months and months worth that, like I said, would have taken me hours to shred. And they put it on the scale. It was like, I don't know, 8 pounds. It cost me $6. I kid you not, $6. They open up the shredder bin, toss my thing in, lock the bin. And then, the next time they have the shredding van come by, it's going in there. So, Jonathan, $6. And I saved myself probably 3 to 5 hours of shredding.
Wow.
That was the best $6 I've ever spent.
Oh, yeah. 1,000%. Worthwhile splurges.
Worthwhile splurges, right?
I've got to start identifying some for myself now. But Brad, as you were describing your plight with all of the stuff that needs to be shredded, one thing that came to my mind is just, are there services out there to actually just decrease what's coming into the home? And we could probably have a whole episode dedicated to this. And I am with you. I mean, we have the shredder that obviously it falls on my shoulders to eliminate the piles of paper waste that comes in with sensitive information, littering. And even more than that, the decision fatigue that comes from like, is this sensitive information or is this like bulk mail going out suggesting that there's an incredible refinance waiting for me if I just call this very suspect number? Like it hurts the head in aggregate. And there's something that I've been meaning to actually look into. And just because you're describing, what percentage of time this takes for you, the current win that you're suggesting saves you money, but it doesn't actually decrease the problem, which is you have a crap ton of mail that you don't want in your home. And there was something that I was told about a while back. And, sometimes it just things you have to hear about things a couple times before you actually take action on it. And this is actually something that I think I am going to look into more significantly on the other side of this call. There's a company out there called Paper Karma, paperkarma.com. And in terms of what it is they actually do, I believe you actually just send them all your junk mail, you put it in there, and then they like go through or you take pictures of it. So it's an app on your phone and you take a picture of it and they go through and they're able to unwind most of the junk mail that you actually receive. So in the unsolicited mail category, there's two different types. There's mail sent using a customer list, and then there's mail that's like carpet bombed across zip codes. We've all seen this. And the second one, the carpet bomb mail across zip code, we got to have legislation. That's going to require a legal body saying, enough, save the trees. But the first one, mail that is sent using a customer list, this is where you can have an impact. And this is where something like Paper Karma can come in, and you can just take picture of the offending, whatever it is. And they do all the hard work of tracking down, who these bodies are and getting you off these lists. So for those of you that, resemble Brad's frame of mind there, maybe that's something that is worth looking into. And for those of you that are like, I'm not going to get in front of this, then, maybe consider the bulk shred option.
And actually, Jonathan, as you were mentioning that, obviously I know nothing about the company, but it reminded me of an email that we got. So I actually included this in the Fi-Weekly email that I send out, actually way back in May of this year. So way back 4 months ago. And it was an email from Deborah. And she actually mentioned, she said, junk mail is the bane of my existence. And here's how I was able to stop all junk mail. And she included a handful of different opt-outs. And so one is credit offers and insurance, which is optoutprescreen.com. And it looks like there's a bunch of other, like down to like Yellow Pages and those like Clipper or Market magazines that you get, like all of these things, the removals exist for them. So we have the older Fi-Weeklies on our website. So this is from the May 11th, 2021 issues. So I guess in our show notes, we'll have this linked up.
Yeah, maybe you could even resend that out in an upcoming Fi-Weekly as well. I'm sure people would.
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, this is a really important one. So yeah, it looks like Deborah included about 7 or 8 different options here.
Wow.
Of just different mailing lists to remove yourself from. And in fairness, just so everybody doesn't think I don't take action, since literally the number one thing we talk about here at Choosify is taking action. I have done some of these things and my mail has dramatically reduced. So maybe my shredding would have been once a year at this point. So it does anecdotally seem that it's working, which is good.
That's awesome.
Hey, this is Andrew from the Choosify team. I hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
And Brad, speaking of junk mail, I think that one of the reasons that we get so irritated with this idea of junk mail is during the time that is allotted that you have to clean it out of your life, you know that it's like, it's time you're never going to get back. You're never going to get it back. And we resent these things that we don't enjoy doing, that we recognize we're never going to get back. But to be honest with you, I don't think we resent it enough in many cases to actually make changes that would allow us to have that time for perpetuity going forward. And a lot of us have blind spots. We have blind spots in our life. And I think about, in the world that we're living right now, where it seems like bad news is just coming in on the daily, how many of us, between the time that we're spending trying to stay informed and the time that we're spending on social media, we just get caught in like this doom scrolling mentality where we're just refreshing our screen, we're scrolling down, we're trying to get updated. Obviously, I'm speaking to myself just as much as everybody else, maybe even more so. I'm a hugely guilty party of this. And this is clutter in our life. This is not productive. There's no significant benefit to the level of information that we have at our disposal when we're refreshing this every 1 to 2 seconds to get the next thing, to get the reaction, to find out, what's going on in the world. And to some degree, we have to just take a step back. We have to detach ourselves a little bit. And I think when we're trying to reclaim our time, what are we going to put that time back into? I've been really thinking about this a lot because I'm such a technology geek. And as an entrepreneur, I tend to, when I get free time, I tend to say, well, now I have more time to work on some of my entrepreneurial projects, that sort of thing. I tend to have more time to spend in front of the computer. And it really is, it's a fail. It's a huge fail. And I've recognized this recently. And as a result of that, a long time ago, we talked about this idea of like this Venn diagram. We talked about this idea of the hobby checklist and the overlapping benefits. And, you can do anything. You can't do everything. Where do you want to spend that time? And I've been really thinking, all right, let's start over. Let's create a new version. And let's create new habits, new patterns in our life that when we're utilizing free time that we've reclaimed, it's not just going right back into staring at the computer screen. It's not going just right back into time in front of a computer or a TV. Let's create an a la carte checklist of things that we can do, things that we want to do that maybe involve more time with our wife and our kids. They involve physical activities. They involve time in the yard, like anything that involves the real world, as opposed to this little world that we create for ourselves in front of our iPhone or in front of our computer screen. This has been a real point of challenge. And if you're going to do a worthwhile splurge, if it's going to be a worthwhile splurge, I feel like it really should be over here in the real world. It really should be something that gets you away from your computer. It should be something that gets you away from your iPhone. It should be something that gets you, into the real world.
Yeah, I love that. And it reminds me actually a bunch of things you said, and that reminded me of past guests on the podcast. So clearly when you're talking about in the real world and having that list of things, that reminds me of Mrs. Adventure Rich, right? And she talked about planned spontaneity, which is an odd phrase when you hear it for the first time, but planned spontaneity. And basically it's just creating a framework where when you have that free time, you have a list of possible things that you can do, as opposed to, hey, it's Saturday at 10 a.m., we've got 4 hours, and everybody in the family looks at each other and says, all right, what could we possibly do? We have no idea. And we just wind up whittling away and wasting the time, right? As opposed to, like you're talking about, if you had that list of just a brainstorm list, it doesn't have to be that you've planned this for 20 hours. It could just be, hey, we have on a sheet of paper, here are the half-day trips that we'd like to take, or just the half-day adventures, right? Or we've got an hour. What could we fit in? And you just glance at this list, and it might have 10, 20, 50 items on it, and you can pick one, right? And again, you had to spend a little bit of time on the front side to be able to then have that freedom to say, okay, we can do anything now. And we're not just looking at each other. And there might be additional layers. Like she was talking about in that episode of, I think, what did she call it? Like a to-go bag they had or some such. And because a lot of, let's just say hypothetically, a lot of your, like in Richmond here, we have the James River running through town. So if you know that you're a big outdoor family and you're going to want to go to the river a lot, you might want to just have a bag packed of water shoes and bathing suits and towels and sunscreen, right? Or you might just leave that in the car. Now, again, like, is it really going to be the worst thing in the world if you had to go and scramble around to find everything? No, but it's one of these things, Jonathan, where doing the little bit of work on the front side just makes it so much easier on the backside when you're ready to say, hey, let's go out to Belle Isle here in Richmond and go in the water or go sit by the rocks, right? Like, if you had to then scramble and get everybody ready and find the sunscreen, right? Like, that's a big pain, as opposed to we already put the work in. Yeah, I thought that was one of those lessons that really stuck with us as a family. And obviously, I'll let you jump in here. But another one just really quickly was The Happy Philosopher and Alligators and Kittens. He talked about way back in episode 48. And you were talking about doom scrolling and bad news and all this stuff. And it's really easy to think that the world is coming to an end, or things are crashing down, or things are bad, right? When all you're doing is scrolling social media or watching some news channel of your choice, right? But when you look outside, at least for me, I look outside, the world really hasn't changed that much. The world's pretty good. My kids are still having a ball playing with their friends, and life goes on. And that's not to minimize, obviously, suffering and terrible things going on in the world. I'm not naive. I'm not stupid. But for me, what used to be a significant diet of this negative news has just been cut out. And I think that was his largest point, was if you're looking for alligators and kittens in your house, the kittens being the good things, the things that make you happy, and alligators being these just stressful time sucks that just make you miserable, what are you going to look to get rid of? Or if you had to triage, what would you do first? And it would be get rid of these alligators. And I think that for me has been another one of the biggest success points in my life over the last 5 to 10 years is, I used to be a news junkie. I used to be a politics junkie. And for some weird reason, I prided myself over knowing more about that stuff than just about anybody. And I got to be honest, I just don't spend time on it anymore. So that has been the biggest alligator that I've removed from my own life. So anyway, just in your little talk there, it reminded me of those two of really the biggest lessons that I've taken away from 500 episodes of Choose FI.
Well, yeah, and the point that they were making with the alligators and kittens is like, you want to remove the alligators so you can add more kittens to your life, right? If you try to just add all these little kittens in there, but you haven't done anything about the underlying, alligators, and this is all referencing, as you pointed out, the episode that we did with Happy Philosopher, and he really dove into this topic more. If you haven't dealt with the underlying alligators, there's no room. They're going to get gobbled up. There's not going to be any space there. So removing these alligators from your life are really key, and creating that open space. And then it makes it a lot easier to fill these in. With us, one of the kitten type things that we added were these small activities. So I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. They're just going to be starting. Both of them are now, for the first time, both of them are going to be in preschool this year. So, last year was just my son. Now my son and my daughter are going to be starting preschool. And that's a little bit of space that's going to be, eaten up each week by the time that they're in school. It's a new milestone as parents with young kids. Like, I know there's parents out there that understand what this means for us. And they are like, all right.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. But we've really enjoyed the time that we've had with them this summer. And I realize my wife loves to fish. She actually loves to fish. I'm not a fisher. I never fished as a kid. It's not something that we did as a family. Like, my wife loves to fish. She grew up in Zimbabwe. Her dad always took her fishing. And it's something that she viewed as something that, she wanted her kids to experience fishing. So on this Red X month that we just went on, she pushed for it. And I said yes. And we got, a rod and a tackle kit. And we were able to spend a little bit of time fishing with the kids. And we caught, in fact, just off the little dock, we caught a little, throwaway fish. We it was only 4 or 5 inches. It wasn't any big deal. 4 or 5 inches. Gosh, good grief. That would be nice. It was even smaller than that. But we threw it on back. But we had that first catch, that loop, that feedback loop of, that something biting the line and taking it happened. So you saw the connection happen with my son. And so now we have that, tackle kit back at the house. And I realized it's something that we can do. As parents with young kids, you kind of have to figure out activities that you can funnel into a 90-minute window. Pretty much anything that you want to do at this stage of life, you got to figure out what can we do inside of 90-minute windows. And this is one of those things. We can add this, small activity to a list of options that we can do either on the weekend or during the week. And there is a little lake, just a man-made lake, quarter mile down the road or half mile down the road. And we see cars pull up there all the time. We were never one of the people that took advantage of it. But now, we're looking for these opportunities. And I recognize what it meant to my wife that she wanted to go on vacation to do it. Like, we can just do it at home. We can do it at home. And we're all, there's throughout the week, there's points and times where if I were not doom scrolling on my phone or staying informed or quote unquote working, I could be doing stuff with them. But then the question is, if you wait until that point where you actually have the time to figure out what it is that you want to do, you end up in that Jungle Book situation. I don't know. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? That's what happens. That's what happens. And then by the time that you settle on something, the time is gone. And Heidi Dusick recently, Ordinary Sherpa, was talking about this idea. And it's not unique to me and it's not unique to you. It's like a life strategy that if we start to come up with a list of things that we like to do, we would like to do, and we recognize the amount of time commitment and what is involved, and we just have them ready to go, you come up with the idea separately, and then when the time presents itself, then you do it. You don't wait till the time presents itself and then you rack your brain and go to, hey, 20 things to do in Richmond, come up with that. No, you need to separate out what are all the things that I would like to do in this idealistic world, and just have them ready to go, top of mind, what would be involved, and then look for the time later. Like, if you do it like that, it will actually happen. And this is what's going to make, I think all of us recognize that, it's great, Brad, to talk about the vacation, great to talk about leaving the area, but like, it is so much more powerful for those of us to recognize, what can we do in our local areas? What can we do in our city? What can we do in the nearby area? And if you don't have any ideas, Heidi was saying this, she actually gets inspiration from the local Choose FI groups. We are a community of people that are thinking like this. How can we utilize their area? And let me just encourage you, if you haven't yet gotten involved, like, let's make this one life that we have to live, let's make it amazing. And let's make it full of community. Let's make it full of time with family. And let's make it awesome. And get involved in your community and let them help you crowdsource it. I mean, they're going to have ideas. They're going to know what's going on in your local area.
Yeah, and Jonathan, it's actually kind of funny that we're talking about alligators and kittens. And I will sheepishly admit that I have actually kind of pseudo added a alligator, or added a pseudo alligator, let's say, into my life, but I'm enjoying it. So here it goes. I know you will be shocked to hear this, but I actually started up my own Twitter account.
Wow.
So
I think people need to understand the loathing with which you have communicated Twitter to me in the past.
Yeah, probably for the last 5 years. Yeah. How many times have I said just, I hate Twitter? I thought I did. And I refused to learn anything about it. I just thought it was a wasteland, basically. And I have to say, our friend Brian Feraldi, who's obviously been maybe at this point the most frequent guest we've had on the podcast, he showed me the light really with this. And he's done something remarkable with his Twitter account. He basically started from nothing. He started from 0 Twitter followers, basically under 2 years ago, 18 months ago. And I think at last check, he's up to about 200,000 Twitter followers. And more than that, because, numbers don't necessarily mean anything, but the amount of engagement he gets and really the amount of value he adds to the world through his Twitter account is remarkable. And that's why people are following him. So I had a long talk with him, and he was just kind of teaching me the ways of it, and basically about it being just the little nuggets of value. Like I said, Twitter is not, hey, post your link to your podcast or your article and people are going to flock to it. That's not the way that platform works. How it works is you just consistently add value, and people are going to start following you. People are going to start engaging with you. You're going to make connections. It's like really everything that I kind of like in this online world is these little, like I said, I sound like a broken record, but these little nuggets of value. That's kind of how I look at my life anyway. It's like these little actionable tips, right? Or these little strategies, or this little lesson that I might teach my daughters that day. And they come in these random, I don't know, fits of inspiration. So it's actually perfect for me to use Twitter to kind of write them down and spread them to the world. So anyway, long story short, I started a Twitter account about a month and change ago. I'm just at Brad Choose FI. So if you Googled that, or you just go to Twitter and type in Brad Choose FI, I would absolutely love for you to follow me. I am probably spending a little bit too much time on this than I probably would desire in an ideal world, but I'm excited. It's an interesting ecosystem out there. And yeah, like I said, follow me. At this point, I'm checking all my notifications. I can't promise that'll last forever, but when I only have 2,000 followers, sub 2,000 followers at this point, I can definitely interact with everybody. So I'd love for you to join me there, and yeah, let me know what's going on.
And it's kind of a cool format for us to be able to field and tackle questions like the one that we got here, where someone said, what would you do if you first started making six figures and you've never made money before? So this is a Twitter question, and I think it's resonating with me just because imagine you are able to create a scenario where your very first job out of school, maybe your very first job out of high school, and I can see a scenario where this would happen. You're making six figures, an entry-level six-figure salary. You've gone from no income for, the first, 18 years, or very little income for the first 18 years of life, to suddenly you're fielding a six-figure salary, and you're like, how do I not screw this up? How do I really set myself up for success for the first time? And so, Brad, you get this question, where do you start?
Yeah. So this was an interesting one, especially because actually this was a photographer who is now selling his photos as NFTs, which I know you and I have talked about just very much in passing. But yeah, I mean, this is somebody who, this new digital world, he's really benefiting from it. So this is somebody who, like we said, what advice would you give to someone earning way more than they ever have before, six figures? And, I think the obvious implication there, Jonathan, is that they don't have a financial background, just like most of us don't. So I think, to me, the obvious first piece of advice is, please don't go out and spend it all, right? Don't commit to structural expenses that are going to be hard to unwind. This is not to say don't splurge and go out to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. Like, obviously, this person's life has changed, right? So I clearly am not saying pinch every penny or, would begrudge you spending some money, but it's those structural expenses, Jonathan, that, I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm wealthy now, so I'm going to live what I think is a wealthy life, right? And they go out and they buy a fancy car and stick themselves with 5 to 7 years of payments, or they buy a house that they may or may not be able to afford. And, that's a 30-year obligation, right? And it's very, very easy, even like you're saying, the entry level, middle class, or six-figure life, like that's a lot of money, obviously. And that's way more money than a lot of people are making, but it's pretty easy to spend it if you're so inclined and you're not paying attention. So I think my first piece of advice would be almost like, do nothing, just take a breath. Is this something that's going to continue, right? Like in this guy's case, this is a photographer selling photos online. Like a year from now, something you're selling for a couple thousand, there's some mania going on right now. Is this sustainable, right? Like that might be advice I would give to somebody who is a salesperson and might have had the best year they've ever had. Let's see if it's sustainable. Like I said, don't go out and buy fancy cars and houses and watches and boats and couches, like you always say, right? Like before is this something that is a long-term trend, or is this a flash in the pan? So I would hate to see somebody get in over their head before they find out, is there a there, right? Is this real?
And part of what you were pointing out is actually in this individual's case, because now you're attaching a face to the question, they are an entrepreneur, and so there's twofold. Like Do you have a regular business cycle? And that's certainly, you need to determine that. But the other aspect is, and I think this is really important too, is that as an entrepreneur, you are responsible for withholding your own taxes and sending it to the government. So because you make 100K does not mean that you have 100K to spend necessarily. You need to kind of get some ballpark of what your tax obligations are going to be, and you're going to need to set that aside, because it's very difficult and painful to catch up on that, if you find out after the fact. So that's an extra little level of nuance. And Brad, just in terms, I'm just thinking out loud here, in terms of an exercise for individuals that are maybe, capturing a 6-figure income for the first time. And in this case, they are a freelancer or entrepreneur, and they're trying to figure out what their tax obligation on that would be. Do you just have like a rule of thumb that you just kind of use generally, or like a best practice for someone just to create a more accurate estimate for what their tax obligation would be? What would you suggest for this person?
Yeah, I think, what's the software that you use? Is it Taxcaster? Is that what you love so much?
I'm a real big fan of, there's Turbo has a Taxcaster that you can use. And there's another one that is even more precise that I've used in the past called Smart Asset. And that one will actually allow you to capture your local and state taxes as well. So people forget, people in Florida can forget because they just have property taxes, but the rest, most other states have a state income tax as well, and it adds up. So, in Virginia, what is it, Brad? It's around like 5%. So on 100K, it's an extra $5,000 or so that you're going to, you don't want to forget that. You don't want to forget.
No, that's a brilliant point. And yeah, your larger point that this is applicable to anybody who's an entrepreneur, or you get a 1099 income, right? You're an independent contractor. Even if you don't maybe conceptualize yourself as an entrepreneur, if you're not a regular W-2 employee where they have withholding for you, tax withholding in every paycheck, then you are responsible for that. And to your point, Jonathan, this is going to be one of those very, very rude awakenings when it comes time. So let's say we're talking about 2021, right? When it comes time for April 15th, 2022, and you have to file your 2021 taxes, and you realize, not only have I made way more than I ever have before, but I withheld essentially $0, right? Like, if you don't realize this, you have sent nothing to the government on your account to cover your tax liability. So there are quarterly estimated payments. I know I've used the government site EFTPS. So that's the electronic payments. It's hard to give like a very general rule in terms of, hey, I would set aside this exact amount, because obviously, Jonathan, it's hard to give financial advice, blanket financial advice, and somebody making $100,000 with a spouse and 2 kids and all those deductions versus someone making $400,000, first time making 6 figures, and it's $400,000, that's going to be an entirely different scenario. But I think if it were me, and you're just asking me that question, I would probably set aside, at least mentally, somewhere in the vicinity of 25% of my net income. So obviously, when you're an entrepreneur, there are deductions that you're allowed to take, business expenses that you're allowed to take off of that gross income. So, in the case of this person, it's not just, hey, I sold my art, whatever that is, or I sold my X, right, for $100,000. That's not what goes on the tax return. You're allowed deductions for any reasonable business expenses that you incur. So I would look at that net income figure. And then I would probably think somewhere in the vicinity, if we're talking 100,000 income or thereabouts, I would probably look at 25%. If you really want it to be safe and just say, okay, it's better to be safer than sorry here, a 30%, including some state tax. I think that gives you a rough estimate. You really want to, obviously we can get into the real weeds of this. You want to avoid penalties, which means you can pay in based on your prior year taxes. There's all this nuance. It's way outside the scope of this. But I think the most important point, Jonathan, is clearly, if you're not withholding, you need to put that money aside. I would advise the safest way is to actually send it, open up an online account with your state tax department and the federal government. Like I said, it's EFTPS. Just Google that to find the official site. And if you send that money, there's no way that you're going to spend it, right? Like, some people could say, oh, I'm going to set it aside. And then things happen, right? Life happens and you spend it, or you invest it, or whatever it may be. And you don't have that liquid. And then, like I said, April 15th, 2022 rolls around and you have a calamity on your hands. So to summarize, so far we've said the taxes and we've said don't inflate your lifestyle right away. I think clearly to me, opening some type of investment account and just starting to think about investing, like I said, you don't want to make any kind of sudden changes because you don't know where this is going to take you. So I'm not advocating put aside $10,000 a month or something, but start the habit, right? Go to Vanguard, open up an account and buy one share a month even of VTI, right? The total stock market index fund ETF, right? A couple $100, and just get in the habit of actually saving, of just understanding the mechanics of, hey, I've linked my checking account to my Vanguard account or whatever investment firm you decide. I personally would use Vanguard, and just get in that habit of, hey, when I have extra money lying around, I don't frivolously waste it, or I don't spend down, or I'm not looking at a point of scarcity or cash flow like I used to of, am I going to be at $0 every month, right? If you're getting that habit, building that muscle of saving, all of a sudden, then you start accumulating some real wealth. So I think those are kind of like the top of my head things that I would come up with. I'm sure you have some other stuff though, John.
Well, you can start getting increasingly sophisticated. Obviously, like we're making this great income, so we've solved the earning side, and that should be tethered by some restraint and some understanding of how much we want our life to actually cost. Then you're talking about investing, and then that kind of is going to open up. One is just get started, and then two is how tax advantage should it be. If you are an employee, you should absolutely look in to see whether or not your employer is offering any sort of profit share or match that you can participate in. Start funding a 401k if that is an option for you. If you are a entrepreneur or a contractor or freelancer, you could start looking into something like a solo 401k. I admit there is some friction here. It can take a little bit to get going. Have a conversation with an accountant if you're confused about how to go about doing that. But that would probably be something to start working on and looking into. And then I'll just give you one thing not to do. Please do not take your extra income and buy digital rocks. Please don't take your extra income and buy digital rocks. So we just talked about how this person actually is making money selling these NFTs. And Brad, I know you've been a huge, not necessarily proponent, but just you're watching the NFT scene. You're saying there's something special going on here. My counterpoint, not even counterpoint, just observation is there's something insane going on in parallel. And this past month, August of 2021, I received multiple updates on my doom scrolling, time that was allotted. One, a digital rock NFT sold for $1.3 million. I could have made this in Microsoft Paint in about 10 minutes, $1.3 million. And routinely, I'm looking at a Forbes article right now, I have over 10 rocks that sold for, 38, 40, 69, 70, 90, 100 Ether, which is a value of in between $200,000 to $300,000. There's some person out there that thinks that that's a good thing to do with your money. It's not. Like we are, like as a society, we're making the tulip mania look like smart. We're making them look very intellectual. Like, I don't know what's going on here. I really don't. But a digital rock is not worth $200,000. Don't do it. Don't do it. Brad, I just need to rant on this. Like, what's going on? Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that is crazy. And that's certainly outside the scope of what I've been looking at. I think, since you alluded to it, I don't know much about these individual,
but you have seen it. Like
arts.
At least it's been at your periphery that some absurd amount of money is going to like JPEG pixels on a screen. Yeah,
there's certainly some crazy stuff. Yeah, the rocks. But a lot of it is based around scarcity, which, not the rocks, but a lot of this other stuff, which is, a significant driver of human behavior just generally. So, I think in-group and scarcity, like those are things that drive human behavior. So I think that makes sense at a very, very low level. Obviously, paying hundreds of thousands or $1 million for a rock is utterly ridiculous no matter how you look at it.
I just need everyone listening to be as outraged as I am. Like this is what living in like some sort of meme world looks like. Like people will look back at this 3 years from now, 5 years from now and say, do you remember when? Do you remember when?
Yeah. And I think what I'm actively looking at is like how I look at the world is what can be world-changing technology. And I think there's clearly, without any question in my mind, that There's world-changing technology embedded in a lot of this NFT mania, and it doesn't get the news when insane things like this happen. And a lot of the world-changing technology revolves around potential royalty streams for creators. Like, for any creator out there should be doing cartwheels about this type of technology and the way to prove whether something's authentic, whether that's this ridiculous digital rock or it's a fancy one-of-a-kind watch that exists in the real world. Like, anything where we always wonder, was that forged, right? Art, or like I said, these watches or fancy cars. Like, there are going to be ways to authenticate these things that previously didn't exist. And that to me is pretty cool. I think, like I'm talking about with royalties and things for artists, think about like a Cézanne painting. Cézanne probably sold that painting for, I don't know, 2 francs, back whenever, a couple hundred years ago. Or I'm probably getting it completely wrong, but, him or his estate never saw another penny from that. Whereas what's cool about a lot of these contracts are they build in royalties upon every subsequent sale to the original creator. So Cézanne's estate would get a portion of that sale, whether it was a year later or 500 years later. Like, that to me is really cool. I think there's a lot of intersection between communities and actually real world possibilities. Again, like I said, of that kind of like in group, like the behind the velvet rope, right? You always think about like what drives human behavior, and that kind of stuff does. Like, even down to, using this term almost makes it ridiculous, but the NFT, like, because I think that's the distraction point. But like your local bar having 100 memberships where everybody gets a drink named after them, and they get their own special mug, and they get to drink for free. And every time that drink with their name on it is sold, they get a penny or a nickel or something. Like, all of this stuff can be built in. Or think about McDonald's coming out with a McRib NFT, where the only way, think about like the cult classic McRib, like the only way you could buy a McRib is if you own one of these very, very scarce McRib NFTs. I've made this up in my own head. Obviously, this is a ridiculous example, but think about like the value of that, or like the potential resale value, or like you're part of something. You're part of an exclusive club. Like, you always look for what drives, or at least I do. I always look for what drives human behavior, and I see it over and over and over again in this technology. So, Jonathan, I agree with you. The rock thing is utterly preposterous, and it's ridiculous, and it's almost besides the point, while real people are doing this world-changing stuff. And I guarantee you, I don't know when it's going to be, if it's a year, 2, 5, 10, but I guarantee you we're going to look back and you're going to say, man, Brad was right. I see this stuff everywhere now. Not the stupid rocks, but this technology.
I wonder, dude, because this rock thing, like, I can almost grant you that I see the possibility. Like, for instance, Picasso, he's got this, creation that he makes, and he always maintains some level of ownership. He has a way to sell off the rest, and over time, like that, okay, like, wow, I get that. That's really cool. But the fact that someone is paying $1.3 million for a digital rock is so damning in my mind that it almost blows up the entire thing in the process. Like, something is sick in this little space right here. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. And it's the stuff of like nightmare legends with the benefit of 10 years of hindsight. I wonder, in 10 years from now, I wonder if we're looking at this really cool way that the next Pablo Picasso was able to maintain level of ownership and profit from his work, and his family hundreds of years later, or whether or not we're like, you remember when those idiots were buying those rocks with their, with their money.
It's a valid point. It really is. And yeah, time will tell. I'm entirely convinced that this will change the world. And because again, I keep seeing it. I keep seeing it everywhere. I see it with music. If you could own a tiny little percent of your favorite artist's song, and you feel like you're part of that artist's life, or you get a tiny little royalty stream. Again, this is all digital. It's all electronic, right? If you are someone who, you think about those people, oh, I knew that band when they were playing in front of 10 people and now they're selling out stadiums. Well, what if you had a way to actually invest your time, money, and energy into helping that artist grow, which you previously never had. Like, I think about a band like Pearl Jam or the Grateful Dead or Phish or something, where people love their recordings of all their live shows and how they could sell. Like, think about Pearl Jam selling an NFT copy, a one-of-one copy of every single show they've ever done. What would people pay for that? Pearl Jam fans would pay a fortune. I mean, you own that show that, in my case, that I saw them play Nassau Coliseum, 1990, whatever it was. And then who knows? Again, I keep brainstorming, right? It's like, then what if there's a system where it's streaming, and every time someone stream that, I get a tiny little piece and Pearl Jam gets a little tiny piece. You can see my face and you can hear my excitement in my voice. Like, I see this everywhere now, and I totally agree with you. And I understand your level of frustration and annoyance, and you probably would use more expletives than that with this rock thing. But just put that aside and just see the technology. This is remarkable stuff.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. It's been a blast catching up with you guys, and we will see you next week as we continue to go down the road less traveled.